All right, welcome, everyone. We're going to give it till about 3 minutes past the hour before we get started. Want to make sure we give everyone the opportunity to join in and get ready for today's webinar. We'll be covering the Nautobot core roadmap, what's coming in 1.6 and 2.0. But like I said, we're going to give it probably about another 2 minutes, 15 seconds, and then we'll get this party started. All right, everyone. As we are waiting for everyone to slowly trickle in, just wanted, for those that are just now joining us, we're waiting till about 3 minutes past the hour for us to get started on today's topic of Nautobot core roadmap for 1.6 and 2.0 releases that are soon to be out. All right, welcome everyone. For those that are slowly trickling in, we are giving it probably about another 45 seconds or so, and then we'll be getting started on today's webinar. We want to make sure we give everyone plenty of time to trickle in before we get the party started. All right, so we are just right almost at 3 minutes past the hour. So the last few people are trickling in for an on-time departure or on-time start. The airline nut me is coming out. So welcome everyone. Today's webinar is going to be on the Nautobot core project roadmap, specifically on the features and enhancements that will be coming out in the Nautobot 1.6 release, 2.0, and then also what we may have in the hopper even beyond that. All right, so I know that I always have a good coupon code. I always love to have some discounts to be able to get some free knowledge or some discounted knowledge to make my life a lot easier. So we are offering a 20% off discount code for these 3 upcoming Nautobot workshops. We've got creating Nautobot apps, Nautobot extensibility, and then automating Nautobot with Python and Ansible. These are all virtual courses that are public courses that are available. We should be dropping the link into the chat just now. Thank you, Kiara. And the coupon code or the discount code is going to be Nautobot20 for 20% off. Do make sure that you grab the Eventbrite link and the discount code if that is something that you would like to do. Again, this is a public course, and those are the dates that they will be offered. And make sure to grab the link and the discount code on the screen at this time. All right, so some formalities here. Before I get into the agenda, we will be absolutely doing Q&A session at the end. So that means that as you have your questions, feel free to throw them into the Q&A section. Don't drop them into the messages section, drop them into the Q&A section. You should see a little button that says Q&A, drop them there. And I'll be trying to do my best to answer them as they come in. And if I've got a really good juicy one for the end, I'll say that for the end for us to do it live in a Q&A session. Otherwise, I'll be answering them as they come in. So with that being said, agenda-wise, we're going to do some introductions. We'll be going over Nautobot, what's coming out in the 1.6 from a feature perspective, then 2.0, and not just the features, but also what's the impact of the changes we're making in 2.0. And then as we start looking forward, what's the rest of the 2023 roadmap and our initial plans that we're laying out for 2024? And I'm sure if you've been on one of our webinars in recent history, you've seen me before. My name is Jeremy White. I'm the Principal Developer Advocate for Network to Code. Been around the block a time or two. And I'm going to hand the ball over to my partner in crime, John Anderson, and have him take it away from there, sir.
All right, thanks, Jeremy. And great to be on again on the Nautobot webinar forum. I am a principal consultant here at Network to Code, and I'm also the product owner for Nautobot. So I am very excited to take everybody through what we've got cooking for Nautobot in the next couple of weeks, months, and into 2024 as well. So we'll kick off here. For anyone that may have joined that is new to Nautobot, just a couple of brief slides just to go over what Nautobot is, what it's all about. Unfortunately, we don't have time to really go in depth here. This will definitely be focused around for folks that have been using Nautobot or know of it and are looking for that roadmap specific update. But if you are new, Nautobot is an open source network automation platform that Network to Code sponsors. We launched in 2021. And it is purpose-built to solve network automation problems with a data-centric approach. So those core use cases, again, being we're building a network automation platform with very tight integrations to the data or the network source of truth that is necessary to drive effective network automation. So in that source of truth, we track things like your device inventory, IPAM if you so choose, network protocols and so forth, but it's also very extensible. So we offer you the ability to augment that data model that comes out of the box with things like user-defined relationships and custom fields, build your own business data validation logic, pull data in from different sources such as Git repositories and so forth. And powering all of this is a very powerful platform, where we offer a robust REST API. We've got GraphQL interfaces, webhook support, job executions for things like workflows, and like webhooks, they're called job hooks. And as I mentioned, deep Git integrations. But then one of the most compelling use cases for the overall platform is we have an extensible plugin ecosystem. So there's a number of applications that ride on top of this plugin ecosystem that provide tailored and targeted support for different use cases that you can install on top of Nautobot. And if you so choose, you can become an app developer yourself. We provide a rich set of APIs and documentation for you and your organization to build out custom feature sets that are tailored to your needs, and all of this is done on top of the platform. So you're not having to worry about certain, non-functional requirements and things like that. So we give you a platform where you can focus on what it is that you're trying to deliver specifically and not have to worry about all of the extra stuff that's necessary to get a true application into a productionized environment. So with that, we'll jump into what's coming in 1.6. So the current stable release of Nautobot is the 1.5 train. 1.6 will be released in the next couple of weeks, late next week, early the following week or so forth is what we're targeting. And it will be a what we call a minor release. So we adhere strictly to semantic versioning. So the 1 is our major release. The next dot, so 6 in this case, is our minor release, and then we have patch releases on top of that. So our minor releases introduce new features and functionality, but do so in a non-breaking manner. So if we were to make changes in a minor release or something like that, we would do it in a way that does not break the interfaces and so forth of existing feature sets and so forth. But usually in these minor releases, you're going to see brand new features and functionality, as is the case with 1.6. So there's really two things that we're going to go over here for 1.6, smaller release in nature, but some very powerful things. So the first on the plate is interface redundancy groups. So these are going to be really powerful for modeling first hop redundancy protocols, VRP, HSRP, and so forth. But at its most basic principle. It's the ability to take two or more interfaces across disparate devices, group them together and say that, these have some redundancy value. And then we optionally give you the ability to take the modeling of the first hop redundancy protocol further, but it's not necessarily required. And because of that, they're also very good for modeling circuit redundancy, in which we would terminate our circuits to the interfaces on those devices, group those interfaces together into an interface redundancy group, and be able to model the business intent to say that maybe I've got two circuits across two different providers at a given site, but they're providing redundant connectivity. From my source of truth standpoint, I'd be able to model that. So very powerful from a loss of resiliency standpoint or so forth, to be able to know that hey, I've got my source of truth plugged into my monitoring systems, and I see one of those circuits go down, and now I can query my source of truth to say, is that critical business impact, or do I have another circuit that is still providing connectivity to that site and so forth? So definitely very powerful feature set there. The next is going to be an enhancement to a feature that is relatively new but very powerful, called dynamic groups. And what dynamic groups allow you to do is define filtering criteria to group a set of objects together. So very common use case would be to create dynamic groups for devices. So I could create a dynamic group that says, I want all of the active devices or deployed devices at a given data center that are of a certain role. And that role may be top of rack switch or router, edge router, something like that, right? And that group is going to always contain whatever devices match the given criteria that I have at any given time. So I'm not having to manually manage the membership of these groups. Say, I deploy a new device and I need to make sure that I add that device to this group. The dynamic group criteria ensures that the membership of that group is automatically kept up to date and so forth. And these work really great when I'm a user and I'm at the group level and I'm going to say, okay, what are all the members of that group? What are all of my top of rack switches at this data center, right? Where we run into problems with the current implementation, and what this new feature in 1.6 is going to help us solve, is a so-called reversibility problem, where if we invert the model and we say, I've got a device and I want to know what are all of the groups that this device is a member of, given that it may be a member of no groups, one group, or many groups. This is what this new feature is going to help us solve, is this ability to do the reversibility of the querying. And this is just the nature of the way that the filter criteria is defined in dynamic groups, is what prevented us from doing this when we originally shipped this dynamic group feature. But we have a new cache-based solution for being able to solve this reversibility problem. So this is really going to open the door to some more advanced feature sets down the road, things like being able to limit the scope of custom fields or relationships to devices that match a given group, and so forth. So we're providing this base functionality in 1.6, and you'll see us hone in on some additional features on top of this going down the road. So those are the two big things that are coming in 1.6 in the next week or so. 1.6 will become what we call our long-term maintenance release. So the reason I call this out here is because as we have given some updates in the past 6 months or so, you may have heard us or seen us refer to the 1.5 train as being that LTM. Since we have taken the initiative to go forward with a 1.6 release, 1.6 will become that long-term maintenance release. And what that means is that as we go into the 2.0 era, the 1.6 LTM will continue to live on for security and bug fixes. So we will issue regular patch releases. Usually that's on about a 2-week schedule. And that will occur in an LTM until the next LTM is defined. So the next LTM after 1.6 will be the 2.x train. Whatever the LTM is that we designate down the road, likely within 2024, that LTM will take the place of 1.6, and 1.6 will be sunset at that time. So basically what this means is we kind of have two upgrade trains or upgrade paths for people to be aware of. So the LTM path, that's going to be, if you think of other organizations might call that like a stable train. and so forth. And then maybe 2.0, you could consider our technology upgrade paths. If you want the latest and greatest feature sets and so forth, you'd be on that 2.0 train. And if you're an organization that is maybe a little more risk adverse, or you just want the stability that's kind of baked into an LTM release, 1.6 is going to be that path for you. So just know that 1.6 will be around for quite a while and will be supported from a maintenance perspective for that period of time. So we'll move on here. Nautobot 2.0 features and impacts. So I'm sure this is what everyone's here for. We've got quite a bit of change coming in 2.0. So as I mentioned, our adherence to semantic versioning, we are incrementing the major release designator within 2.0, which means that this is an opportunity for the project to make breaking changes. So as an app developer or a consumer of extensibility feature sets, you do need to be aware of the specific changes that we're making here. And while I am not able to get into the very deep technical details of the changes that we're making here today, do know that we have all of this documented. We have migration and upgrade guides that are being put together. Excuse me. As we enter the final phases of the 2.0 development cycle, we plan to ship 2.0 here kind of early in Q3, hopefully end of August, early September timeframe for 2.0 as we kind of just clean things up. Most of the major development is complete at this time, and we are doing more of those documentation and migration guide work as we go through. But some of the big things on the plate here is some pretty significant changes to the IPAM data model. This is to address some performance concerns, but also limitations in use case of the existing IPAM data model. And we've got some changes to the way that jobs work, the way that job authors will interact with the available APIs for jobs and how jobs are executed under the hood. Consolidation of the location model. So we'll talk about what's happening with the removal of the region and site objects and how that's being consolidated into the single location model going forward. Some changes to CSV import-export functionality. Ultimately, this will be in pursuit of some more advanced feature sets like bulk edit via CSV import export, but we'll talk about what all that means here in a moment. And then one of the bigger things that we've been talking about for a while and that we will begin to see in 2.0 is a entirely redesigned web interface. And we have chosen to go with a new implementation based on the React web framework, and we'll talk about that more here in another slide. But first up, this revamped IPAM data model. So the first thing that we did is introduce a concept of namespaces. So these namespaces are going to allow us to form the proper boundaries for address space uniqueness constraints. So this opens the door to better modeling of overlapping IP address space if I'm an MSP or I'm doing mergers and acquisitions and I need to account for the fact that I have valid overlapping address space and be able to better document that in the IPAM system. So namespaces can be associated to prefixes and VRFs, as you might imagine. You can optionally associate them to locations. So if I need a namespace per site, because maybe I have a use case where I have overlapping address space in every site that I deploy or something like that. Namespaces are really going to shine in these types of environments. But know that we have designed it in a way that, if you're a single enterprise and you've got a flat network and this isn't exciting to you, they're really not going to get in your way. So there'll be a global namespace object that's always in the system for you out of the box, and you really don't need to mess with it beyond that if you don't feel that you need to. So that's perfectly valid. Then from a performance standpoint, one of the big things we're doing is creating a concrete relationship between prefix objects. So previously, if you had kind of moderate to large data sets, you probably are noticing some severe or some mild to severe performance penalties when you have nested prefix hierarchies. So, you've got a /8 and a bunch of /16s underneath that, all the way to, 24 networks that may be deployed in, or even deeper, right? The problem with the existing data model is that there's no direct relationship between those parents and children in that hierarchy. So what's happening is when we want to load that page in the web UI or make queries in the API, we're having to calculate that hierarchy on the fly. And that's where we're running into performance penalties in terms of time and computational power to do that today. So by changing the data model to implement those parent-child relationships directly, we can very explicitly solve these performance issues. And to you as the user, the end user, you really, this is being done transparently. We've got some really good interfaces for being able to identify proper parents for you. You know, if you want to use like the get next API to say, here's a parent, give me the next available /24 from that container. We take care of creating the underlying parent-child relationships for you, so you really don't have to worry about it. The net benefit to you is, again, all of the performance improvements here. The aggregate model, next up, is going away. We find that there's a lot of confusion and ambiguity over the purpose of the aggregate model. So we've decided to move away from it and instead say that the intent of what were aggregates yesterday are simply top-level prefixes within a namespace going forward. So you can do things like have quad zero, like the screenshot shows here. That would be an aggregate in this case. And we've not done anything with the concept of the rear objects or the regional registry objects or anything like that. Those can still be associated to prefixes and so forth, but we're trying to simplify the data model to remove confusion and ambiguity over its usage. Types are being consolidated a bit here. So containers and networks and pools are what we're going to have. So containers can have children, and the networks would be those subnets that are actually deployed on your network. You know, those are networks are the things that are actually configured on interfaces, right? And then containers are typically used for sub allocations or just pure documentation purposes, right? And then pools would be for you know, saying that all the IP addresses within that network are usable, DHCP pools and so forth. We will in the future, not in 2.0, but in the future be introducing IP ranges. And that will likely take the place of the pool type altogether, but we'll have at some point in the future better support for or any support for IP ranges. We are consolidating on a generic role model, and then we want to have that role model be simplified, kind of like statuses. So you'll be able to create your own specific roles, and that role model will be across the application. So device role and the IPAM role that existed are being consolidated, much like we did with the status object implementation some time ago. All right, next up, changes to jobs. So job logging is changing. So instead of a kind of very bespoke and custom interface for doing logging out of your jobs as an author, you'll just use the Python standard lib logging. So hopefully this is a little more natural and will lead to more explicit and more Pythonic code that we write within these jobs. So the net result, fewer weird and custom interfaces that you as an author have to keep track of or refer to documentation to use. We're just going to use standard lib Python logging to do this. You still have the abilities to do some of the fancier things like log objects that then get represented in the web UI for job executions and things like that. So that still all exists. A little bit lower level, you know, probably doesn't have a lot of relevance to, you know, end users and so forth. But as a job author, you can know that celery or jobs are now celery primitive tasks. Sounds cool, but what it means at the end of the day is that we are opening the door to some of the more advanced celery usage for things like job chaining, which will be formal workflow support. So execute one job, now execute another job, and have that wrapped up into a workflow and so forth, as well as concurrent execution. So for things like complex workflows where, you know, I need to get some data, build a configuration, deploy it to the network, go update another system, you know, parts of that I can do in parallel and so forth. So we'll be able to do that with our workflow support coming. So the base functionality will ship in 2.0 for doing things like that. And you'll see in some later slides, we're going to have some targeted work on bringing more elevated and direct feature sets around this workflow support going forward. The way that we reference jobs is being simplified. So it's just the name. So if you've been using the REST API to do job executions or referencing in the UI, sometimes it can get a little bit convoluted as to how we reference a job, either by its UUID or by its complex Python class path. So now job names just have to be unique, and that name is how we'll reference them. So hopefully that's a little bit easier going forward. Consolidation of the location models. So as I mentioned, the site and region models as they exist in 1.5 and previously are going away. And we are consolidating on the location model that we added, I believe, either in 1.3 or 1.4. But this gives you all the same capabilities that you have with site and region, plus a lot more. So there's a concept of a location type that allows you to define a organizational specific hierarchy that you want of different location types and how they're related, whether you can nest certain types together, what objects you can associate to certain locations and so forth, be it devices or racks or prefixes and so forth. So this is all getting simplified into one way to do location modeling. And we're providing data migrations for this and for all of the IPAM stuff as well, so that there is a seamless upgrade path for users that have larger data sets or concerns about, what does this mean for all of my region and site data that I have in my existing Nautobot instance? We are providing data migrations that will automatically convert all of that data for you into these new paradigms. CSV import export revamp. So we're making some changes here. So if you have been a power user of the import export functionality, you're likely very annoyed in many areas by the fact that there's inconsistencies in maybe the names of headers or what fields are included in the import versus export for a given model. So we're simplifying all of that. So this is CSV import export is actually using the API underneath the hood. Doesn't really matter to you as the end user, but what it means is that there's a grand consistency between import export now, the concept of being able to round trip. So if you exported a data set from one instance of Nautobot, you'll be able to import that directly without modifying the file into another instance of Nautobot. And to take that one step further in the future, not in 2.0, but in the future, we are going to use that base functionality to do things like bulk updates. So export, go into the web UI, do a filter, get a set of devices that you want to edit, export that as a CSV, take it into Excel, make a bunch of edits, change sites, change statuses, whatever, and then take that file and re-import it and have all of that data updated. Instead of today, the only thing you could do is create new records via that mechanism. So that's definitely something that'll be quite powerful coming in the future. So next up is our web UI revamp. So we have a grand vision for what we would like to see a totally revamped web UI within Nautobot look like. Unfortunately, we need a little bit more time to realize that vision. So what's happening in 2.0 is we are shipping a new web UI in kind of a try me or experimental alpha status. It's going to have limited functionality, but you as an end user will be able to switch back and forth between what we'll call the legacy UI, which has all of the functionality that it ever did, plus more in 2.0. But you'll be able to play around with the new React-based UI. And notably, we're going to have some capabilities in there where you can provide us feedback, and we'd love to hear it, because what we want to be able to do is iterate over this design and get it right. Make sure that we're listening to people's feedback and create the best experience that we can from a UX perspective. So what this means is that there's going to be limited functionality that you'll be able to do. So it's really only read-only, and it'll only be for certain models, things like devices and prefixes and locations and so forth in 2.0.0. With every patch release and every minor release in the 2.x train, we're going to iterate and include more and more functionality here, with the end goal of in 3.0, within that 2024 timeframe, of sunsetting the legacy UI and this be the only web UI option going forward, because hopefully we will have created something really, really stellar here. So as an app developer, you may be thinking, oh, do I need to go learn React and so forth now? We are going to not support apps within this UI in the initial release. So in the 2.x train, in one of the minor releases, probably 2.2 or 2.3, we're going to issue the first support for apps to start integrating with this new web UI. We've got some really interesting patterns for simplifying the way that apps do this today. So the goal will be that for most use cases, the 80% use case, you will not have to write React code to integrate within the UI. You'll be focused on your interfaces in your data, so the data model, your Django models, and the REST API representations, and that we will provide the tooling and the boilerplate necessary to then consume your app into the new UI. But one of the biggest benefits of going with a React-based approach is it'll be a lot snappier, but we can support much more complex UX flows. So multi-stage workflows, better data processing and so forth on the client side within the UI. These are things that are just really convoluted and complicated for us to be able to do in the legacy UI today, which is why users have shown frustration with the number of clicks that it takes to do things. Like if you install Nautobot for the first time, I think we can all reminisce on the number of clicks it takes to create a first device, right? What we really want to do in this new UI is focus on those UX first principles to make these flows as simple and as elegant as possible going forward. So here's a screenshot of this. I do have a demo. We will look at that here in just a moment. But just to get a feel of kind of the direction that we're heading with this going forward. So we will look at this live in just a moment, I promise. Just a few final thoughts on some other things going on in 2.0. I mentioned the generic role model, so device role, rack role, IPAM role, and then the IP address choices elements are all getting consolidated into one generic role, and it will work just like status does today, where you as an organization or an end user, administrative user, can define what are the role values that I want, what types of data those role values can be associated to, whether it be devices or prefixes and IP addresses and so forth. REST API versioning, we are going to implement a change in behavior here. So we have for a long time had proper API versioning via request headers in our REST API. That has defaulted, even in 1.5, to the 1.2 version of the API, and that was in pursuit of our desire to always do things in a non-breaking manner. So you could always upgrade that as an end user, but what it has led to is folks missing out or not being aware of new features and capabilities because we default to that older version. So moving forward in 2.0, Nautobot installs will ship with a keyword called latest, which means every time you update Nautobot, you'll get the API version will be set to the latest available version of the API. But you as an administrator can always pin that to a specific version, just as you could before. So if I'm an organization and I want to install a new version of Nautobot, but I still want to retain the API capabilities of the previous version for some time until I have the ability to update my tooling and so forth, you can still pin that to the older version, no problems there. So just a change in behavior there. One of the cool things in the REST API also is we have depth control. So if you've used our API before, you know that we have nested serialization of objects. So if I'm looking at my devices have an associated site or location. I would see as a nested dictionary within that JSON response the information of that site or location when I'm looking at the device. What the depth control allows us to do is, as a client, request how deep I want to go with that nesting. So if I want less data, I can go depth 1 or depth 0, and I can get just the top level attributes of the device. And if I want to go, to a site and then maybe to a tenant associated to that site, I can go depth 3 or depth 4, and just control the amount of data that I'm getting back, the amount of detail. And as an app developer, that means that we're actually moving away from the nested serializer implementation pattern. So less code that you have to now write and maintain because of this going forward. So Because it is 2.0 and because we are making changes, we have refactored and done some housekeeping on the internal code base. This does impact some of the available APIs as app developers or core developers if you're contributing to the open source project as well. So some field names have changed, some locations of classes and so forth have moved around. Hopefully it all makes better sense going forward, but just know that these are some of the breaking changes that you will need to be aware of, but that are properly and well documented from a migration standpoint to 2.0. All right. So let's take a look at some of those features in 2.0. So I am in an instance that is running our next branch, specifically beta 2. So 2.0 is not yet available, as I mentioned, but we do have some betas available. We would love for you to install them in your environments and try them out and give us feedback. But let's take a look at prefixes, and we can talk about a few things here. So you'll note some of the changes to the types, and we can see this prefix hierarchy here. And we'll note that we have some overlapping address space here, so or just some outright duplicates. We've got 10/8, and that's actually because we have 3 namespaces now. So we have our global namespace, a cleanup namespace, and that's actually cool to see in here because this is actually a part of the migration process. So this data set was upgraded from 1.5, and we have some business logic that is documented that will walk you as an organization or administrative user through what's going to happen to your data as we move this through. So there's some steps specifically with IPAM in more advanced use cases. So the more complex your address space layout, the more actions that we're going to take here. So this is saying that we created a duplicate namespace here to house some objects that we need to go back through and just take a manual review of post-migration here. But then we have another one called customer axiom with some address space here. And if we just look at that, we can see the VRFs and the prefixes and the IP addresses that belong to this namespace. So if we took a look at this guy, zoom out of the way, and we were to edit this prefix, we can now associate prefixes to their proper namespace and so forth. And again, that namespace is going to be the boundary for uniqueness constraints, really opens up the door to a lot of specific IPAM related use cases for overlapping address space and so forth. The next thing I'll show is the location modeling. So you'll notice under organization, site, and region no longer exist, and we just have locations and location types. So if we look at location types, I've got 3 types here: region, site, and building. And what this is saying is this is the hierarchy that my organization has defined for my usage here. And if I just wanted to add another one, and we'll call this, the parent will be building, and we'll call this new type floor. And we'll say that devices can be associated to floors. So we're saying that, and we'll see this in a moment when we look at the device, we're going to assign this device to a specific floor in a building. So I'll create this, and we can see this hierarchy that's been created here. So region, site, building, floor. This is the type. So this is an actual location. It's just the hierarchy that we're forming here. So if we go over to locations, what we've got is a bunch of countries. So these would be regions and so forth. So let's create a region called Campus A. Status will be active. And I'm going to create and add another. And my location type will be a site. My parent is going to be Campus A. And we'll call this the science department. Okay, so this is, I'm just modeling a college campus or something like that. So that's our science department. And then we've got a building, and that will be the science department. And this will be, building 101. Building 101. And then we'll create and add another, and we'll do, sorry, we want a floor here within that building. And so this will be building 101, and we'll do floor 2. So something like that. So we'll create that. And then we'll notice here, so these are our actual locations. So they follow that hierarchy that we just created, but we see the nesting relationships here. But then if we go to a device, and we just picked one of our devices here, and let's just edit this device, we are going to go to the location, and we're going to change its location to that floor that we just put in. And we can see, it gives us the whole lineage of the hierarchy that we're creating here. So that's really powerful. What's nice is you can actually use this to model both physical and logical constraints. So, you could get down to rows in a data center, and then maybe within your rack, you want logical designations of network areas or things like that. You can actually take it down to the logical layer as well. So quite powerful from that perspective. We'll go back to the homepage here, and down at the bottom, we've got this link for view in the new UI. So we're going to click on that, and that is going to take us over into our new React UI. So I, as a user, can switch back and forth with these. But just so you get an idea of the look and the feel that we're going for with this new UI. Excuse me. So the navigation has moved to the left. We do have what we're calling the context bar on the left that really just gives us an idea of what's the general area of the application that we're in. And this kind of goes back to the different primary use cases that we have with Nautobot of being both a network source of truth and an automation platform, is that we have different user personas or different groups within our organization, if we're large enough, right, that may be in here and have totally disparate uses for the application. So the context can help us idealize where we are within the application and so forth. But all of our primary navigation is on the left-hand side now. So if we go over and look at devices, as soon as this pops up, yep. So this has come up, and we'll be adding the ability to do searching and filtering, as you might imagine, and the detail view for these devices. But you can see that it is, at least to me, quite a bit snappier, and it will continue to speed up as we get towards much more production-worthy candidates for this new web UI going forward. So just wanted to give you a brief look and feel for what we're going for here. But again, I can switch back and forth from this UI to make sure that I can still perform my my day-to-day duties within Nautobot. All right, so with that, we'll switch back over to the slides. I've got just a couple of slides to go through for the remainder of 2023 and then into 2024, and then we can use the remaining time for some of the Q&A. I'm sure there's some questions. So 2023, so this is going to be after the 2.0 release. And these will be our focuses. So job chaining. So as I briefly mentioned, what we're doing in 2.0 opens the door for this. And in the remainder of 2023, one of the focuses is going to be on really honing in on this workflow support. So our MVP for this kind of thing is to be able to define, as a job author, have different conditions that I can choose to go and execute another job after job A, right? So that could be on success of job A, go execute this other job, or on failure, go do this other thing, or always go do, another thing, so forth, right? And we'll get more advanced with the capabilities here as we go forward. Next big ask that we've had for quite some time is the ability for job authors to generate a file as a part of their job, and then have that file be downloadable from the UI. So we've had the ability for some time for you to be able to upload a file as input to a job, but the ability to generate a report or some data extract or something, and then have that intelligently from a UX perspective be associated in the UI from that job execution, so then I can click a button and download that file, that will be coming later in 2023. And then some specific inventory integrations. And what I mean by this, what we're going to start with, is the ability as a job author to say that I want to associate certain data objects from Nautobot to a job execution. So if I'm writing a job that is deploying configuration to the network, it is very likely that I would want to say that this job execution touched these 10, 20, 100 devices and what those specific devices were, right? To say that this job execution was responsible for updating these devices and be able from a UX standpoint to click through and view the details of those devices and so forth. Also really powerful, one of the big use cases for jobs is tailored data creation or manipulation in certain business environments. To be able to say that this job execution was responsible for creating these records of data within the application. So definitely very important from an auditability standpoint, but still from just a plain UX perspective, still very important and very powerful features that will go towards larger inventory-based initiatives that we want for workflow execution. Next up is DOLT. So bit of a leap, but basically what DOLT is it's another type of database backend. So today Nautobot supports Postgres and MySQL, and you as an organization get to choose what you want there. We're adding a third option called DOLT. DOLT is a MySQL compliant database, but what is so special about DOLT is it actually mixes concepts of Git version control. And this isn't just the schema, this is the actual data, so the tables itself. So DOLT is really awesome because what I can do is say, hey DOLT, give me a branch of my current database. And then because that is the underlying database that Nautobot is using, I can then go in Nautobot and change a bunch of data. Create new devices, create a new site deployment, and then I can issue a pull request within inside of Nautobot, and another user can come in and review that change in the context of Nautobot itself and say, "Ooh, I like that, I don't like that," or so forth. And you can go back and forth in a natural pull request flow that you might be used to in a DevOps world or software engineering world, right? And then eventually you'll say, "Okay, I like it, merge it." And then that will merge that branch into the main or production branch of your Nautobot instance, and that becomes the data that you can then automate against. So really powerful from a network automation perspective, because this is going to help us solve a lot of very specific business related problems of peer review and tracking small changes and commits and so forth, better data hygiene and so forth. But it's also going to help the implementation side of the house of, if you're using your network source of truth today to drive network configurations, one of the big problems that always comes up early in that process is, when do I make the modifications in my source of truth in the context of a change window where I need to generate those configurations and push them out in a limited time window, and not have that data upset other system integrations where maybe my monitoring system is looking at my network source of truth for the true inventory. And I'm saying, oh, I'm deleting some devices or adding them, and I don't want that monitoring state to be out of sync, but I need time to prep that data for the change window that's coming up, right? This is where we feel that this is really going to shine. So DOLT is a product of a company called DOLT Hub, the previous slide. We have been working with them for quite some time to make this integration a reality. One of the biggest constraints was waiting for the DOLT database project itself, which is also open source, to reach its stable 1.0 release. That happened a couple of weeks or maybe 1 or 2 months ago at this point. So that was really what we were waiting on to really push this integration going forward. So we've had what we call the Nautobot version control app, which is a part of the plugin ecosystem or app ecosystem, available in kind of an alpha status for a while. So the remainder of 2023, we're going to put some focus on getting that production worthy and kind of getting that across the finish line. All right, next up. So on the network source of truth side, some of the new data models that we're going to introduce support for controllers. So controller-based architectures, wireless access points, certain firewall types of deployments, or some SDN type architectures where you need to model a device controller and then the relationships of the member or subordinate devices to that controller. So we're going to have first class support for that coming soon. That's been a labor of love from Jeremy. So thank you to him for that. Next up will be application support. So maybe a little bit limited here, specifically in core, but this is going to be kind of the ability to track an inventory of an organization's software applications. But this is really going to be helpful to many of the ecosystem initiatives that we have, such as the application dictionary, which is something that we have written a lot of blogs about. There's a lot of content about that, but that's the ability to model relationships of applications to the underlying infrastructure and being able to automate firewall rules for those applications and so forth. So really an enabler to that whole initiative. And then the contact model. So this is going to replace a lot of discrete contact related fields. So, who's the contact for a site, or who do I contact for a, device that's gone down or something like that. So we're going to centralize the contact model and be able to associate those to different data sets within the application. Helpful for modeling things like teams as well. Excuse me. So UI UX, much continued iteration, as I mentioned. We are going to spend a lot of time on our new React-based UI. We're going to iterate by adding new model support and expansion of the feature set that's available throughout 2023 and into 2024 as well. It's the ability to add and edit data where it's read-only today, advanced searching and filtering and so forth. And then we really want to, as I mentioned, focus in on problem areas of the application, areas where users have frustration today because the workflows in the web UI are suboptimal, really looking at what they're trying to accomplish and really simplify those actions fundamentally. One of the big areas that we'll focus first on with that regard is some of the IPAM work, just to continue that theme within 2.0 of the revamp of IPAM. So specifically, we want to do things like workflows that are targeted towards subnetting or supernetting. So, merging address space, subdividing address space, and so forth. And just general UX improvements for the management of my IPAM data. All right, and now, so that's 2023. It's a lot of stuff. We're about halfway through the year, a little over halfway through the year now. So we'll move into some of the initial plans that we have for 2024. So these are a little bit higher level than what you've seen, right? But these are kind of the themes that I'm thinking of as far as the direction of the project. So for data models and things, we have a desire to consolidate devices and virtual machines, that functionality, into one kind of device data model. And this is really going to help us set the stage for where we want to go with cloud modeling. Expansion of namespaces. So namespaces have already proved to be a really great idea for IPAM. Let's do more of namespaces in the Python sense, right? So expand that concept to devices and circuits and so forth, right? I would really like to see a focus around concrete modeling for management protocols and settings. So these are things like NTP servers, DNS servers, and so forth, how those get distributed geographically or just throughout the different areas of your network. The way that you typically do that today is with config contexts. And while config contexts are great, they're very powerful. They can be cumbersome to use, especially at scale. So having a more concrete and directed approach to this problem is really where we're gonna head with this. And then certainly network protocols and concepts, more support for things like different routing protocols. So we've got BGP's app is out there, and people love that. We want to do things like OSPF and so forth, right? And then a big focus on cloud networking and connectivity as well. So being able to model everything that I'm doing in my cloud environments. Another big theme is going to be enterprise data governance and management. So as we continue to see Nautobot excel in enterprise environments, there are certain more non-functional requirements that people would like to see met. So things like ownership of specific data sets within Nautobot. So who's the accountable party for managing this data and its quality? Having people attest to that fact. Classification of the data, how important is my device inventory versus my set of VLANs, right? How do I classify that from a business data governance standpoint? approval workflows for that. So DOLT will go a long way here, but also some thoughts about, what we can do for approval type workflows if you don't want to go the DOLT route or can't for whatever reason, right? Reference metadata in other enterprise systems. So if I'm syncing data with our with our vast SSOT ecosystem, so be able to know where did that data come from, what is its attribution and provenance of that particular data point, right? What is the last status of the synchronization of that particular attribute of that data, and so forth. More robust access controls. So we've got a pretty neat access control framework in Nautobot today, but being able to do more with it, like say, only my data center team can manipulate the rack of a device and so forth, things like that. All right. So that kind of wraps up the presentation here. We've got a few minutes left for Q&A. So I will be happy to answer any questions, Jeremy, if you've got any good ones for me.
So I've got one good one that I think that you covered a little bit earlier on, but I think it would be good to kind of expand on it a little bit more. But it's more so around the exact example was we create a new location of a floor, and then we need to set some attributes or do some stuff with that or edit it. So I'm assuming this is also going to be applicable to like dynamic groups, which you have to first save the model, then go back and edit it. What are we doing to kind of help with those, like clicking all over the place and having to nav away or save and come back?
Yes, definitely. This is really where we're going to spend a lot of time on UX research and fundamental, first principles of UX design in our new UI. Is we realize today that a lot of those design considerations in the existing UI are very painful to work with if you do a lot of data manipulation in the application. And it's today it's purely a balance of technical capabilities in the existing frameworks that we use and trying to strike a balance and getting features out the door, right? Getting something that is usable. But yes, we will be spending a lot of time on that specific kind of thing going forward.
Awesome. That's what I love to hear, because exactly to your pain point around your first time creating a device, that's also the same eye roll I have when I create a dynamic group. I first got to create it, then I can assign my filters. So those types of things, I'm happy to see that that's on the roadmap. Another that I'm seeing in the chat right now is any plans for collapsible items, think locations, networks, etc., where there can be a large number of children.
Yes.
So I think like, yeah, the new prefix with a bunch of child prefixes and stuff. Yeah.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So if you looked at prefixes here, so that is actually one of the early design considerations that we did have with the new UI was we called out the need for components to be able to do that. So if I wanted to collapse my /8 right here, to be able to do that and kind of go down the nested hierarchy. So that's you certainly will see that in the new UI going forward. You won't see it day one. So prefixes will be supported in the new UI if you were to install 2.0.0 in a few weeks. So you just know you won't see that collapsibility just yet, but it is on our board for development.
And also, same person said, would also add to the group selection at those collapsible boundaries. So I'm guessing that would say potentially if we collapse at the /18 for the 10.0.0, our east-west potential groupings or something to that effect. And that might be from IP ranges or containers or other related items. I could see it. Does that sound about right?
Sure. Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, if I collapse it and say I want everything under my /8, yeah, makes sense.
Got one that just came in around references to modeling network zones. That's he's seen in GitHub issues.
Yep.
Although it seems like there's been some pushback, but what's the stats? What are we thinking on that?
Yeah, that one's a pet project of mine. But yeah, the concept in my mind is to be able to model a abstracted network zone and then be able to say, this is all the address space that belongs in that zone. These are all the interfaces that are connected to that zone and so forth, so that, one of the big things, especially from a network automation perspective, that I've often implemented that sort of thing in the past, not in Nautobot, which is why it's not there today. But it's for things like trying to optimize firewall policy, where you've got zone-based policy, and being able to know that given a destination object or network, what zone is that going to map? And then more importantly, what other firewalls am I going to traverse to get there? So being able to model those zones within Nautobot, definitely. I can't commit to that being specifically on the roadmap somewhere right now, but definitely it's something that's always in my mind.
For sure. And we do have some limited support for zones and interfaces tying to zones within the firewall modeling plugin. So there is some limited support that's there. Probably not going to be as robust as some of the core features and core items that we have, but there is some that's there. One last tiny thing, because I know we are 30 seconds over. One cool thing to mention is we did just launch a new Nautobot app called Nautobot Floor Plans. And it gives you the ability to kind of model out your actual DSIM, your data center layout, and what does it look like from a rack elevation perspective. And I've got data thrown in the demo sandbox if you want to pull that up. And the first floor plan under AMS will absolutely show kind of the art of the possibility on what this could look like. Sorry, throwing a curveball at John at the last the last second.
As much as I love dark themes for the purposes of the presentation. Yeah.
Sure. So we're under organizations and then floor plan, location floor plans.
Right. Perfect. I assume we could probably just pick one of these. Yeah, awesome.
So yeah, super cool ability to kind of map out what does your data center look like, and being able to map out tiles, map out what specific racks may go into a certain place, what are their rack depths, and everything from that point of view. Right now, the rack depths I've got, or racks that I've got mapped out, are just a tile depth of 1. They could be they could be a wide rack, so they go 2 deep instead of just 1. Mapping out aisles and your HVAC and cooling and things from that perspective as well.
Great. All right.
Cool. Well, looks like the Q&A is dwindled down. So I say it's been great.
All right. Yeah, and you can always find us on our Slack community, the Nautobot channel within there. It's a great way to reach and interact directly with the Nautobot core team, myself and others as well. So love to see everybody there if you're not already.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Take care.